Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me, as always, is the man who can tell the difference between butter and I can't believe it's not butter. That's right, Mr. Ryan Siebold.
Ooh, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy? Feels good to say that on video.
I know, right? I'm super stoked. We actually finally did it. We didn't know if we would actually make it to video, and here we are. For anybody that's been watching us for the first time here, Ryan and I have actually had an audio podcast for the past 3 years called Esoterica Cinema, and we are finally making the jump here to video, aren't we, buddy?
That's right. For better or worse, these are our mugs.
Yep, and we figured, what way to go ahead and start our video journey here with you guys than looking at a franchise that is actually really near and dear to our hearts, and that's the Evil Dead franchise. So for today, we are going to be looking at Evil Dead Rise, and I believe, Ryan, you have a description for us, right?
That's right, buddy. Real quick, before we get further, the difference between butter and can't believe it's not butter, a little bit of faith. Just a little bit of faith will get you there. Just got to believe. Evil Dead Rise from 2023 came out just not that long ago, just over the spring, and this got a lot of attention. Was made on a budget of $17 million-ish and brought in about $146 million. So that's where all that attention came from. A lot of people love this movie, and we're going to pick it apart and see if we like it as much. Google has this described as a reunion between two estranged sisters gets cut short by the rise of a flesh-possessing demon, thrusting them into a primal battle for survival as they face the most nightmarish version of family imaginable. That's right. This is directed by Lee Cronin, who came on the scene back in 2019, directing a little film called Hole in the Ground. And this stars Alyssa Sutherland, Lily Sullivan, and Gabrielle Eccles. Jason, this was a divisive one. I feel a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I got to ask you, as always, what did you think about this movie, buddy?
Ryan, going to be happy to tell you, but first, for everybody watching, if you haven't, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps us out with the algorithm, and we appreciate your support. Now, Ryan, as far as the movie's concerned, I thought it was a decent movie.
Right.
Bordering on good. I definitely liked it, but I can't say that I loved it. I do feel like there was a lot to appreciate about the film, but I also felt like it sort of lacked just a solid skeleton for which to really build the film around. And I think more than anything else,
we're just going to keep up with the puns. I love it.
But more than anything else, I think just the biggest aspect that I found lacking was a sense of fun. Even the Fede Alvarez Evil Dead that I feel like we'll probably end up referencing a lot on this episode.
Yes.
It was definitely a more serious approach, but it also still found a way to stay fun and to sort of do these little like comedic winks and nods at the franchise and the past entries and such. So I feel like that version did a much better job of capturing the spirit while evolving the film and the franchise into something different,
right,
than maybe this film did. How about you?
Yeah, I thought that Fede's, and all the previous iterations knew what they wanted to be a little more. I felt like the pacing was a lot better. This one kept stalling out to me. It would have these glimpses of greatness. For starters, Alyssa Sutherland as our villain was fantastic. I thought absolutely this was more of the villain's story than it was. We never really had a true cut Ash versus the Evil Dead kind of hero that Bruce Campbell gave us. And was it Mia, I think, was the heroine in Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead? But same type deal. Yes. Like, I felt like we had a clear-cut vision of who we were rooting for in those moments. And by the end of the film, she had taken on that gauntlet of the hero of our movie, and she was ready to fucking go kick some ass. And I felt like our heroes in this one, our little ragtag family that was trapped in their apartment, never really quite got there. They were more reactionary the entire time and put on their back foot, which didn't give me a lot, to really kind of root for as the viewer. I was never like, yeah, go get them. It was like, oh shit, the entire movie. So, I just felt like it kind of lacked those moments. The pacing was a little off too, but when it shined, it really came through. I loved the practical effects. Again, I think Alyssa Sutherland as the villain from Soup to Nuts was great. I thought the cold open though it had nothing to do with the rest of the film. It was just kind of
Absolutely nothing.
kind of to wet your whistle. And by the way, I think this movie is like an hour and a half or something like that. And an hour and 37 minutes or something. So to have a cold open in a film so short that has nothing to do with the rest of your film, just to kind of wet your whistle, as cool as it was. In fact, I would argue that may be the coolest part of the film. Was that with, ripping her scalp off and the drone shot that kind of simulated the camera on a plank shot going through the woods.
That was cool, yeah.
We kind of got a modern interpretation of that Sam Raimi classic shot in the woods that's been replicated many times. There were a lot of moments like that, right down to the title card that came up over the mountain range across the lake was just like, holy shit, this is fucking going to be awesome. And then we get bogged down in all this exposition about where her husband is and the kids and all this stuff, and the sister being an unwilling hero and stuff. And I thought that was kind of like, okay, we're going to sit through a little bit of this and then it's going to go. And then it kind of didn't go for a little while until they finally found the Necronomicon and did all the things that we were, knowing were going to happen until it kind of launched full boat. And even then it stalled out several points along the way, even to the point where the demons would kind of stall out and say, you are a bad sister, blah, blah, blah. You're never going to have, it's like, man, we're still on this, even in even in these violent moments, these trying times of demons, we're still going to get into this familial exposition dump. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, and so let's go ahead and identify what it is exactly that's kind of causing this difference of reaction to it. I think, if I'm trying to think about maybe what are some of those things where this film differed from those previous entries, I think the first thing right off the bat is we have to talk about the nature of the death scenes,
Right.
If you're here for a horror film, in large part, you're here for the death scenes, right?
Yes.
And you either get that or you don't. But the really, truly great horror films, at least the ones that you and I tend to enjoy, are really the ones that embrace the creative nature of death, right? Like they're not just there to necessarily throw a bunch of blood at you. For those people watching, like Ryan and I famously hate torture porn, right? Like that's, right. We like really sort of fun creature monsters, we can get into some hacking up eyeballs and limbs and stuff like that, right? But if it's there's just something where if it's just like, I don't know, torturous, it's something different, right? But regardless, when you think Evil Dead, again, yeah, you're thinking of like the creature coming back from the dead and taking off her head and the dance under the moonlight and all of that, right? You're thinking about the chainsaws on the arms. You're thinking about the monster with all the crazy makeup from the basement and
right.
Dead by Dawn, right? All this sort of stuff.
Yeah, swallow your soul.
Yeah. And even especially in Evil Dead 2, right? Where all of like the deer head and the lamp and all these inanimate objects come to life and start laughing at him and with him. And it's like this giant cartoon. And so similar more to the 2010 remake, this one doesn't have that cartoonish element, but also the nature of the deaths are such that they're not really that creative, it's just kind of your sort of run of the mill, like slashings, arms get cut off.
Lots
and
of
like
stabbings.
Hands get cut through, a lot of stabbing. Exactly. Right. And so I think we both agree that one of the cooler moments was where they sort of simulated the tree rape from the previous movies, and they sort of did the thing in the elevator.
The elevator was great.
The elevator cables. That was cool. That was definitely a unique way to do that, and it's also obviously a lot less uncomfortable than some of the previous iterations of that same scene. So that was cool, but I didn't really necessarily get the same sense of creativity to a lot of the other deaths that would come into play. And then, we also kind of mentioned this, which is that, we're not exactly young spring chickens fresh out of high school anymore, right? So this movie, is really tough on kids, dude. This movie does not care if you're 8 or 10 years old. It's gonna come after you with everything it has. And so this movie is just constantly and violently killing 8, 10, 12-year-old kids in the hallway in their apartment rooms. And it's as somebody who's a little bit older, it's that kind of hits different, dude.
Right.
This is a little bit uncomfortable with regards to not seeing the same stuff come from, a slightly older character.
Yeah, after we cut away from our cold open, they introduce us to pretty much the floor of people in this apartment complex, high rise or what have you. And then, so you kind of realize you're dealing with this finite group of people and most of them are probably going to die. Now we know from the trailer and the posters that Alyssa Sutherland is going to be our villain. She's going to be the one that's possessed. But then that leaves pretty much Lily Sullivan and a bunch of children, and then the old man down the way that does bring out our homage to the boomstick, the breakaway shotgun. But outside of the shotgun, nobody has any weaponry or anything, so they're all just pretty much using cutlery and steak knives and stuff like we talked about. So therein lies all the stabbings. But yeah, it's Lily Sullivan, this old man, and a bunch of kids. So when I'm watching this, immediately my thought process goes, are they gonna because we got to have some deaths. So are they going to kill these kids? And the answer is, yeah, they're going to kill these fucking kids.
They are. That's what they're here for.
Even to the point, by the way, that Alyssa Sutherland, spoiler alert, down the way, towards the end of the film, wears two of the kids as like a pseudo meat suit to get around because she loses her mobility. And so she just wears these kids as arms and limbs and possesses them as well. So, a very, very hard time with that. But yeah, and then the teenagers look very young too. For I know two of them, or the three kids or whatever, were going to leave to go get pizza, and they were going to drive, I think. And it's like, are these kids old enough to even drive? Like, they looked very young. The one kid wanted to be a DJ and stuff. The one that finds the Necronomicon, and then the daughter, the mid sibling or whatever. How old do you think she is? Like 14, 15, 16?
Yeah, the older ones I think are like 14, 15-ish, and then but I think the youngest one is like an 8-year-old girl.
Yeah.
So, and she definitely gets it just as much as anyone else.
And then the mid one, say she's 13, she gets like straight up stabbed right in the mouth through the top of the skull. What was the doll?
Well, that's Bridget. And then she has that scene where she like eats the glass or whatever after she's possessed and stuff. Like, that was brutal.
Yeah. So it was definitely odd. Definitely you go back in time to the 80s and all these cabin in the woods movies and slasher flicks and stuff. They were all covering teens. I get it. Like, the Nightmare on Elm Street films and Halloween and all of that. They're all about kids in high school that are coming of age, losing their virginity, being stabbed in tents in the woods and stuff like that. But I will say these kids looked more like kids than any kids I've ever seen. I feel like they've always gotten older actors to kind of downplay, which was made it a little more palatable, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the whole, what is it, that show, Seventh Heaven or something, or James Vanderbeek's like a 28-year-old high school senior and stuff like that.
All of those. Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah, the American Pie kids are very obviously in their 20s,
The old Simpsons deal with Luke Perry from 90210 where he smiles and then his skin all scrunches up because he's obviously like 38. Don't I know how
that 8-year-old girl looks 8 and that 13-year-old girl looks 13 and the 15-year-old kid looks 15. So it prompts that more visceral response, and that's probably has something to do with us being a little bit older. If we were teenagers ourselves, okay, well, they're our age, so that's going to hit differently, right? And I do think that's something interesting about this film, because you kind of touched on it before, which is this film almost doesn't have a protagonist. Yeah. Or it could even be argued that the mother character, who's really the antagonist, is kind of the protagonist, but then maybe it's Bridget, but then also there's also the movie sets up I forget her name, but it's the roadie character, right? The one who's
Lily Sullivan is the actor's name. I forget her
the Lily Sullivan character. And she's supposed to be sort of the movie sets it up like she's going to be the protagonist, but then it doesn't really go into her story much, And also, let's take a step back and recognize that, for the things that do work, one of the things that doesn't is the characterization of this movie. And I think if you're going to do a movie that's all about familial relationships and mothers and brothers and daughters and all of that sort of turning on each other, I think it helps if you can establish a close personal connection, or even if it is a fraught connection, let us know. Right up front, the movie's basically content to just give you one very quick detail about each character.
Right.
And then we move on, right? So we know that dad left. We know the mom's a tattoo artist, I think.
Yes.
The sister's going to a woman's march. The son wants to be a DJ, and the girl likes dolls or something, right? And it's cool. That's all you need, right? That's all you guys. That's all you guys need to buy in.
Yeah, okay, but sweet. It somehow takes 30 minutes to explain all that to you and really lay it on thick. You would think that you'd have a little more attachment to all these people if you were going to spend that long in the mire of getting to know them, right? I felt once the possession started, the Necronomicon came out, and all the things that we love about Evil Dead movies started. I didn't care about these people other than the fact that I had pathos that they were children, and I was like, oh God, like we talked about, a little bit of wince from that, a little cringeworthy, but the person I felt most attached to and the person who did the best job really playing their role was Alyssa Sutherland as the villain. So I thought she did a fantastic job. Great physical work. She's 40 years old, and I saw some behind the scenes footage, and she was really strung up in that elevator. A lot of practical effects. It did give us some cool moments like the swallowing of the glass and stuff like that. But, the Deadites historically in Evil Dead are just solely driven by murder, and they're out to get you. And that's what made even the original on such a low budget work, because they were just an unstoppable force. They were busting from the basement. Yeah. They were coming through the doorway. The camera tracking shot on the plank of wood when it's going through the woods is whizzing through that woods. It's sped up, and it feels like everything feels more intense. And they never stopped to really revel in self-harm, and all. Like, there's so much just talking, and your daughter rides in hell, blah blah blah. I just felt like it wasn't really kind of an imposing force. The Deadites in this one, they're always pausing to talk it out and monologue a little bit. I don't know.
Deadites as James Bond villains. Yeah. Now that I've got you, Ellie, let me tell you my plan.
Right. But that's in turn, I think that's where, because you have the original series with Bruce Campbell, and we've talked about how that feels more fun and playful because there's humor involved and whimsy and all that Sam Raimi charm that he brings to other films like Drag Me to Hell that I love, and even the Spider-Man films and stuff like that. Then you pass it off to Fede, and Fede doesn't necessarily have a lot of that whimsy, but it feels epic, and I felt like it was way more intense. Like that, the Deadites in that film and all the violence and everything was like full throttle. It was like, full of roids and just going 150 miles an hour. It was very intense, to where you're like, oh shit, you're holding on to your seat. It's very much an edge of your seat kind of movie. But this didn't have that. It didn't have the whimsy, and it didn't have the intensity that Fede's had. So it was left kind of somewhere in the middle. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. It's hard to put my finger on it, but there's when it comes to the 2010 remake, there's something about that one that's like actually kind of, it does have a sense of fun, even though it's more graphic. And I wish I could sort of like expound on that a little bit better. I haven't necessarily identified exactly what it is, but like for some reason the winks and the nods in the 2010 remake kind of made me chuckle a little bit more than these ones.
Yeah.
And again, maybe it's just the fact that, again, in that one we've got 20 somethings, and it just makes it a little bit easier to stomach because, again, we don't have these like kids just being like barreled through the hallway, for example, right? There's a couple shots where they like show Ellie, the mom, when she's possessed in the hallway, and these kids are just being like thrown up against walls and like brutally stabbed in the gut and the chest and the head and all this stuff. So like, it's really, again, that's not fun the way that like Ash getting into a fight with a demon in medieval times where a spike wall is going to come in and smash them if he doesn't get out first, right? Like, that's fun. And then he has to do his little jump up superhero thing where the chainsaw clicks into place.
And I understand this film lacks the humor and the whimsy, but I was more comparing it to Fede's. Like, what do you think differentiates this from Fede's? Because Fede's doesn't have a lot of that either. And yet you and I both love that movie dearly. You introduced me to that film, and I thank you for it because that film rips. This one was good. I'm not going to say this is a bad film. I don't regret watching it. I don't think I would rewatch this film anytime soon. Yeah. Whereas I think I would rewatch Fede's right now. I love that movie. And the only thing I could pin down was that from the cinematography to the pacing to the narrative, I felt like that movie, once it leaves the station, it never slows down. It never takes its foot off the gas. It's just like intense all the way through. And one thing is going on to the next, to the next, to the next. You're just whizzing through. It's also not a very long film like this. It gets to the point. But she's being buried and dug up. They're building the defib machine, the makeshift defib. I felt like, you're going from one thing to the next all the way down to, and the cinematography to that, it rips too. The DP from Fede's I forget his name, but he shot Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, the Amazon series. And he's an epic cinematographer. He does a great job. This guy that shot Evil Dead Rise did Ash versus the Evil Dead. He did like 14 episodes of Ash versus the Evil Dead. So we had a good history with the project and the title, but I just don't think he's as strong of an intense cinematographer. It felt very moody and gloomy, but it also kind of felt very just like generic Blumhouse horror film, like The Nun or something like that. Like I didn't feel like I was being given anything that I couldn't see in 30 other horror films.
Yeah. And I do think it really just comes down to, like we were talking about, just the nature of those creative deaths, right? Like when you're talking about the 2010 one, there's like the whole thing where the girl gets the infection, right? And then she has to go into the kitchen and get like the automatic turkey cutter and like cut off her own arm and such. And then there's just all these moments, and then not to mention the just amazing ending where they bring Slayer's raining blood to life and have like the devil or at least some crazy demon literally crawl out of the ground while it just rains gallons and gallons of blood out in the actual forest. Like that's amazing, and it's funny because I feel like this film tried to like do a little bit of that, like keep the self-referential aspect of the franchise going, but it's like, see, in this one, instead of it being like a rain of blood outside, it's going to be a rain of blood inside the parking garage because they go in the wood chipper thing, right? And so it's like you still have that visual element of like drops of blood, being strewn about and falling down, but it's just a slightly different context. In this, it's a lesser and smaller context, so that's gonna be not as impressive obviously as the 2010 version, but yeah, it just kind of feels like all of this was like Evil Dead light, or like it was just it was the more of the paint by numbers Evil Dead than it was the like swing for the fences Evil Dead that the previous ones were.
The wood chipper scene was cool. I just think that leading up to that moment, I would have loved to have seen Lily Sullivan go a little more like Ripley from Aliens, like, get your hands off of her, you bitch, and has the shotgun, ready to fucking go.
Yeah.
Or the chainsaw or whatever, like, and then be more aggressive. Like, I'm coming after you. And then this demon wearing the kid meat suits coming after her and they're sneaking around. They're in a parking garage, which is, home to many of, very intense scenes where you could be sneaking around cars and you don't hear anything, all of a sudden the demons on
Of course, we all remember the infamous Bowfinger scene where he's being chased.
The dog wearing high heels,
the dog.
Yes. Bring that
Terrifying.
on. Yeah, I would have taken a dog in high heels over this, but the wood chipper scene was cool. There was, plenty of little winks and nods to the original. I don't know if you noticed this, but of course we had the boomstick. We had a blink and you miss it Bruce Campbell cameo. A Bruce cameo, if you will, on the.
Is it even blink? Like, what do your ears do? Because he's only there in audio format, right?
Yeah. He just kind of makes a quick cameo as like but I do think that it was cool because they kind of made it canon that he was a time traveler trying to stop this thing from happening.
Yeah.
Stop the Deadites.
He's in a recording from like the
that.
early 1900s or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually did a little research and I guess there were comic books that got into some of that lore with his time hopping and he even showed up in the Marvel Zombies series apparently, which is fantastic. I had no idea about that.
That's cool.
Yeah. Kind of neat.
No idea either.
But yeah, outside of some of that, the chainsaw was the same color as Sam Raimi's 1972 Oldsmobile. I think it was a 72 Oldsmobile.
Oh, right.
So
was this the first one that didn't have that?
Right. This is, I believe, the first Raimi property, even though he didn't direct it. They didn't get his Oldsmobile in there, the Delta. So they went ahead and made the chainsaw the same color versus the chainsaw in the original, which is more of a maroon or burgundy, if I'm not mistaken. So they went ahead and let the chainsaw be the old stand-in for the Oldsmobile. And then, we come full circle and they tie in that cold open with the ending of the film, which didn't have anything to do with the rest of the film. I don't know how this woman slept through literally all hell breaking loose in her apartment complex. The elevator's busted. So she's now talking on the cell phone to her friend And she's like, yeah, it was crazy. Last night was wild, man. And then, so we now know she's going to go to the lake, and it's going to pick up where it left off in the original, the cold open from the beginning of the film, which, again, I stand by, this was probably the coolest part of the film, even though it was completely unnecessary narratively.
With the film being an hour and a half, I totally would not be surprised if they were just short. Like if they came in at like 80 minutes and were like, hey guys, we need 10 more minutes. And it's like, how about a 5-minute beginning and end sequence?
Right.
Huh? That work for you?
Yeah.
All right, let's get that going. I'll throw some deaths in there. We'll make it a party.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see that. Well, yeah. So Ryan, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap this one up here. And for everybody watching who doesn't know, who hasn't listened to the podcast before, we like to end all of our podcast reviews, long ones and short ones, by doing a little feature we call 3 adjectives. It's just what it sounds like. We're going to give you 3 adjectives that best represent our response to watching this film. Ryan, I will let you kick off our inaugural video, 3 adjectives, buddy. What do you got?
Well, my first one's going to be summertime theme park, because I felt like there were some cool moments, but you had to wait in line for them for a long time. So you had to have some patience to go down that water slide or get on the roller coaster to get to those fun moments. My second one was Toastios, because it just felt like the Kirkland brand of something that I really love dearly. I wish
anyone who doesn't know, those are knockoff Cheerios.
Right, yeah.
Just so you understand that joke, because that is a brilliant joke that needs to be understood.
Well
done, sir.
Yeah, it's just generic. It's like the generic version that's so close to it just makes you want the original, or go back to the good. So Toastios, and then my last one is avocado toast, because avocado toast is good. I'm cool with avocado toast. But when you go out for breakfast, specifically when you watch a horror movie, what you're going for is that big stack of pancakes with butter and syrup. You want all the indulgence of a horror film. And I felt like this was good. It was, I can't say this is a bad film. I enjoyed it for what it was. But it just wasn't the sugary indulgence of a good horror film that gave me all the fun that you said this movie was lacking. I agree with you. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, definitely. Man, those were great, dude. Those were a lot of fun. I have just like straightforward, like general adjectives. I'm gonna have to up my game now. For my first, I have visceral. I do feel like this was an intense experience for the most part when it was actually moving along. I also feel like this movie was shallow because, as we mentioned, there just wasn't a lot of meat on that bone, as well as inconsistent. It's just, there were some ups, there were some downs, didn't make for a wholly satisfying experience overall. So visceral, shallow, inconsistent. We are also going to give you guys a star rating out of 5. But before we do, just want to once again go ahead and remind you, if you haven't, please do like and subscribe. And most of all, tell your friends about us. And by the way, if you like what we're doing here, or even if you don't, or you have comments about the movie, leave them in the comments below. We would love to hear from you, and we will probably even get back to you. So, Ryan, out of 5 stars, I'll let you kick this off. What is your star rating for Evil Dead Rise?
Jason, I'm giving this one 3 stars. I thought it was average. I don't think this is a bad movie. I think, it was all right. It was a 3-star movie.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. I did appreciate the craftsmanship behind it a little bit. I thought the acting was pretty good for the most part, except for the roadie chick. And, there was enough to warrant my trip to this film, right? But at the end of the day, don't think it was something that I really need to come back to. And 3.5 stars just felt like good rating. So I do also want to remind everybody watching that you can go ahead and visit us at the website, esotericacinema.com, or hit us up on the emails, esotericacinema@gmail.com. And once again, my name is Jason Peters. He's Ryan Siebold. We're Esoterica Cinema. Thanks so much for joining us here today for our discussion of Evil Dead Rise. Be sure to stay tuned for more content coming up, and enjoy the movies.